is through, and McElroy has done it! What drama here! McElroy for United, it's 2-2. They scored twice in a minute, and McElroy, Manchester United through and through, Sammy.
Manchester United weren't officially languishing anymore, nor were they competing in the European Cup or winning leagues anymore. They were just existing. But was the Dave Sexton era at Old Trafford all that boring? Manchester United had taken a year off from the cliched cut and thrust of top-flight football, and everyone had thoroughly enjoyed themselves. Now they were back in the big time. Their form under the swashbuckling Tommy Docherty simply continued. Lou Macari, Sammy McElroy and Jerry Daly had all hit the ground running in front of goal as United dropped just 1 point from their first 6 matches back in the First Division. Whilst it was never going to last too long, as defeats at the domineering Liverpool, the eventual champions, a surprise package of QPR, their eventual closest challengers, and the team that had most recently won the league, Dave Mackay's Derby County, attested to. Yet, speaking of reigning champions of England, Dave Mackay's Derby County,
Hill trying to count it and does! Gordon Hill! And that surely ties it up! Gordon Hill's second goal, 2-0, and now within touching distance of Wembley.
and finally concrete evidence that Manchester United were back. They'd gone to Hillsborough and eliminated one of the top teams in the country, and in the process penciled themselves in for a first Wembley date since the 1968 European Cup final. 8 long years and United wouldn't be facing a team of the calibre of Benfica this time. It would be Southampton, a second-tier team. The FA Cup was simply begging to be won by the Red Devils, ending 8 years of torment.
To Stokes, who's onside. 1-0! And Lilac, Benamy and Southampton take the cup for the first time in their history.
An enormous kick in the teeth for what ought to have been a lap of honour in their easing back into the highly pressurised life of top-tier football. Regardless, a would-be sour end note to the season was sweetened somewhat by a 2-0 home victory in the Manchester derby as United confirmed third place. Whilst it would be City who claimed any sort of silverware in winning the League Cup against Newcastle United, there was no indication that one particular club from Manchester would have to wait until 2011 to get their hands on another trophy. Spoiler, it wasn't United, they'd barely have to wait 12 months. Regardless, the 1976-77 campaign would only become renowned and viewed through rose-tinted spectacles because of the dramatic denouement. There was in fact very little to shout about in the intervening year. Tommy Docherty became the latest Manchester United manager to covet Peter Shilton as an Alex Stepney replacement in between the sticks. Whilst he would have a decent success rate in coveting certain things whilst at Old Trafford, Shilton wasn't one, as the United board balked at the goalkeeper's wage demands despite meeting an agreement with Stoke for £275,000. It was a far more inconsistent season for United, as injuries in particular to Martin Buchan proved costly. Regardless, United continued in their top 6 position. Not enough to grant a return to Europe automatically, but if their fairly comprehensive early defeat to Juventus in the UEFA Cup was anything to go by, it was probably a good job, even if recent 3-time champions of Europe, Ajax, had been scraped by in the first round. A 3-0 defeat in Turin was mirrored in United's exit in the League Cup, except in the cooler climes of December at Old Trafford in front of their own supporters against Everton in a disappointing quarter-final collapse. With timid and fair-weather league form, United were now relying on an old familiar, the FA Cup. Walsall were tiptoed beyond in the third round, whilst QPR, far removed from their prior season nosebleed of second place, were also disposed of by a singular goal. The dark sense of humour from the balls of the 5th round draw pulled together the prior year's finalists for one last game. Southampton still middling in the second division and a notoriously tricky trip to the Dell. A draw was certainly an improvement from that hot day at Wembley 9 months prior, and Jimmy Greenough put United's turmoils against the Saints behind them in the replay. It didn't get any easier as Ron Saunders' Aston Villa were the next club to travel to Old Trafford in a mid-March quarter-final. Villa, a team that were eloping to bigger and better things, a team that would confirm European football with a 4th place finish in Division 1, were sunk by Lou Macari's winner. They returned to Hillsborough for the semi-final and, historically, a thorn in their side when Leeds United met them in the whites of their eyes. The pair had met at the same stage in the same competition twice, and twice Leeds had come up trumps with a 1-0 win. Those 1-0 wins, both via Billy Bremner goals and both with Don Revie in the opposition dugout, both in replayed fixtures too. Leeds wouldn't have the luxury of any of these omens this time. Revie was busy faltering as England manager Bremner had long departed the club, and this match would be settled inside of the first 90 minutes.
Organise themselves in their penalty area. On the wind, a back header by Houston, and Jimmy Greenough. That time Pearson won it in the air, and it might come now for Koppel. That's the second one, a brilliant goal for Manchester United. Stevie Koppel, Manchester United are through to Wembley for the second successive year.
Middling second-tier opposition in the cup final 12 months prior, United could have hardly asked for a different calibre of opponent at Wembley in '77. Champions of England for the second season on the spin and first-time finalists in the European Cup against Borussia Mönchengladbach in just 4 days' time, it would be the first ever FA Cup final held between Manchester United and Liverpool.
As Jimmy Greenough header on for Pearson, a chance on here. Pearson is the scorer. Case, good turn. Oh yes. Smith slips slightly. Jimmy Greenough.
And so a first ever English treble winner had been thwarted for another day. Manchester United now knew they could mix it with any team on the planet, and Tommy Docherty was instantly installed as a club hero. And yet he wouldn't manage another game for the club. Just when it had seemed both he and United were back in business, love got in the way.
I went to the chairman's house at Old Edge, and so Matt was back from Holland then, and they asked me, they couldn't have that sort of thing at the club. They asked me to resign, which I refused to do.
It is the board's intention to appoint a new manager as soon as possible.
The victimised physio would later go on to get his free shot at Docherty, and he was boosted by a wage rise and the retaining of his job at the club. Meanwhile, Tommy Docherty and his new love lived happily ever after. The question was, would Manchester United do the same? Manchester United couldn't be seen to have had an adulterer managing the club. This was still 1977, remember. So they had to dip back into the managerial market, and at a moment's notice too, in what was United's greatest moment since the days of Sir Matt Busby. Since he had properly deserted the post of club manager, United flitted harshly between two personalities. Franco Farrell was the reserved and bumbling immediate successor in 1971, but was quickly booted out for the rambunctious Tommy Docherty after just 18 months. The Dock had lasted a touch longer, 4.5 years, and now they returned back to the reserved. Dave Sexton had been part of the famous West Ham Academy during the 1960s that had birthed players such as Bobby Moore and Geoff Hurst, to name just two England World Cup winners. Pertinently, Sexton had made his managerial name in the sport whilst across town at Chelsea. Like Docherty before him, Sexton had concrete success at Stamford Bridge, claiming both the FA Cup and Cup Winners' Cup in the early 1970s against teams of the lustre of Don Revie's Leeds and Real Madrid. Manchester United had now changed dramatically. Sexton made the changes almost instantly, taking a forensic and analytical approach to life at the Cliff training ground. A camera was set up allowing the manager to film training and going through it with a fine tooth comb with his players afterwards. So, did it mean that success would continue to flow at Old Trafford? The afterglow of the prior season led to the sharing of the Charity Shield with champions of Europe Liverpool before 3 wins from their first 4 league matches. A highly tactical team, United were seemingly moving through the gears, as seen in Lumakari's hat-trick away at St Andrews against Birmingham City on the opening day. There wasn't much to shout about aside from that opening day optimism, however, in the run-up to Christmas. The low ebb being a 4-match losing streak in October and November that took in away defeats against West Brom, Aston Villa and Nottingham Forest, as well as at home to Arsenal. Furthermore came the club's controversial European campaign. They could barely have been drawn a tougher task in facing French side Saint Etienne, who were just over a year removed from participating in a European Cup final. However, crowd trouble in a 1-1 draw in France had United on the brink of elimination, courtesy of UEFA. They were only spared that embarrassment thanks to the governing body's ruling that the second leg could be played, but played over 100 miles away from Old Trafford.
Coppel déborde Farison, centre, Kurkovic touche un peu la balle, Piazza ne peut rien et personne marque. 1-0. Sur lui est dépassé, Lopez essaie de s'interposer, Kurkovic est pris à contre-pied, 2-0.
So in front of a decent 31,634 in Plymouth, United progressed thanks to the goals from Steve Coppell and Stuart Pearson. They'd be back at home a month later in the second leg of the last 16 against Porto, but were faced with an insurmountable task. 4 goals down from the first leg in Portugal, United managed to grab 5 goals back at home, but shipped too many goals to find themselves in the latter stages of the competition. An inconsistent team anyway at the best of times under Tommy Docherty, with the bravado stripped away, United lurched from pairs of defeats against West Ham and Nottingham Forest, Coventry and Birmingham before form fell off a cliff come the spring of '78 when both Liverpool and Leeds took both points off United. Reeling, they ended 6 winless weeks with 5 wins from their final 9 matches to add a minuscule amount of gloss to what had been a dour season. A season that couldn't be bolstered with performances in the domestic cups, losing in the first hurdle of the League Cup to Arsenal and at the 4th round stage of the FA Cup to Ron Atkinson's West Brom. It was clear something major had to change, and Dave Sexton went big in the transfer market to pull both Joe Jordan and Gordon McQueen from rivals across the Pennines, Leeds United, whilst Gary Bailey succeeded Alex Stepney in net. Gordon Hill, despite top scoring for the club in Sexton's first campaign, was flogged to Derby County for £300,000, replaced by Wrexham's Mickey Thomas. The Welshman never would live up to what were pretty low expectations set by Hill. Again, United promised something in the first knock-ins of the 1978-79 season, beating Birmingham on the opening day again before getting a creditable win at Elland Road through goals from each of Sammy McIlroy, Lou Macari and Gordon McQueen. Their next away trip was wholly predictable when a more settled Ipswich Sound side under Bobby Robson thrashed United 3-0. Then the season became incredibly sticky. The following 4 encounters were drawn 1-1 as each of Everton, QPR, Nottingham Forest and Arsenal were able to hold United to just a point. Whilst each of Manchester City, Ipswich Town and Spurs were beaten in front of the Stretford end before Christmas, United fans had lost patience. If their pitiful 1-1 draw with newly promoted Southampton on November the 4th drew jeers from the Old Trafford faithful, it was a saving grace that their next league encounter, a 5-1 devastating defeat, was played away at St Andrews against Birmingham City. Watford had already dumped United out of the League Cup, so after 4 successive league defeats either side of the new year, Sexton was already leaning heavily on the lure of the FA Cup to save another season. Envious eyes were even being cast towards the Hawthorns when Ron Atkinson and his West Brom side pitched up at Old Trafford and taught them how to play football yet again.
Played off there, or replayed by Tony Brown. Sorry, back heel for Cancelo. What a magnificent goal! Cancelo's header on, and Tony Brown has scored. That's a neat little header from Regis for Cunningham, and if he keeps his head, he'll score. Controlled. A nicely weighted little pass for Ali Brown, who's turned inside Brian Green on for Regis. Oh, what a goal!
Thankfully, the FA Cup kicked into gear in the new year and teams like Chelsea, Fulham and Colchester United fell in the earlier rounds before Mickey Thomas proved his worth by prompting a quarter-final replay at Old Trafford with Tottenham Hotspur. There, Joe Jordan and Sammy McIlroy's goals penciled United in for a third cup semi-final in 4 seasons. The last time they reached the final, they'd conquered Liverpool. To reach the final this time, they met the same opposition. At Main Road, United were 8 minutes away from another stunning glory over their nemesis, only for Alan Hansen to bundle in a late equaliser, forcing a replay at Goodison Park later that week. In a tenser affair, the game was settled on a singular Jimmy Greenough goal. Having already beaten the best team in the land in the semi-final, surely now United had one hand on the famous trophy.
Trying to feed Price. Price is in here for Arsenal. Torben on right and Sunderland arrive as well. Waiting in the centre for the cross. Stapleton. 2-0 to Arsenal. And the Queen. Gordon McQueen turned it in. United have scored. McIlroy's through. And McIlroy has done it. Right across Sunderland. It's there. It's 3-2. Arsenal are back in front for Alan Sunderland. Arsenal have won the cup after one of the most dramatic last 5 minutes that Wembley has ever seen.
An affair that played very much to Sexton's predilections, boring and on the wrong end of the scoreline before a climax very much the antithesis of the United manager, yet still maintaining the quality of a losing scoreline. Everything changed though in the 1979-80 season. First off, Sexton continued the clear out and went close to a British record to acquire Ray Wilkins from Chelsea for £825,000. Secondly, good form followed with only 3 away defeats before Christmas, once again to Ron Atkinson's West Brom, but also in the Manchester derby and at Molineux. On a more positive note, United went to White Hart Lane and won, and they also thrashed the reigning champions of Europe, Nottingham Forest, on Christmas week thanks to all 3 goals from Sexton's duo of Joe Jordan and Gordon McQueen. 1980 could have started better for a number of reasons. First off, Spurs got their revenge from the league defeat by eliminating United from the 3rd round of the FA Cup. After losing at the same stage of the League Cup to Norwich City, Sexton's team had just the league to focus on. Then the owner, Louis Edwards, went and died, and if you ask his son, he was killed by ITV, who publicly uncovered claims that his company was being investigated for bribing local councils. If you ask the coroners, he had a heart attack in the bath, probably admittedly brought on by stress. If you ask Manchester United, his son Martin was now their new owner and chairman, aged only 34. Amidst this though, the United League form never wavered. Arsenal beaten in the final match of 1979 before an invaluable derby win over City, which curtailed a 3-game stint which generated 0 goals and a 6-0 piping handed to United at Portman Road by Bobby Robson's Ipswich Town. Mickey Thomas's winner in the derby rejuvenated the club going into the final straight. Another wobble, admittedly away to Nottingham Forest, was quickly corrected 3 days later when league leaders Liverpool turned up to Old Trafford. Jimmy Greenough netting the winning goal as the title race was officially on. Even more so when United rattled off more victories: Bolton, Spurs, Norwich, Villa, Coventry, all beaten. And yet it proved too little too late. Liverpool had acquired enough points earlier on in the season, had a way too superior goal difference to United, and the nail in the title coffin was hammered in by Leeds United on May the 3rd at Elland Road with a 2-0 defeat. It confirmed another league title for Liverpool, who were streaking ahead to occupy the perch out on their own as the most successful English league team. United at the very best here, an inferior second. Nonetheless, and quite correctly, Dave Sexton earned himself a new contract and a big wage rise. If league form is the barometer for how good a football team is, Manchester United had come on in leaps and bounds over the prior 12 months. Their summer transfer activity was supposed to be an act in going for the jugular. They profited on Andy Ritchie's great form, selling him to Brighton for £500,000 whilst replacing him with Gary Birtles. Birtles, a European champion with Nottingham Forest, became United's first ever £1 million player. Ritchie had made a name for himself with a hat-trick against Tottenham in April 1980. It took Birtles until November 1981 to score more than 3 league goals for the club, and that was the story of what became a disastrous 1980-81 season. As in the prior campaign, United lost just 3 league matches before Christmas. Unlike the prior season, they won only 6 matches, drawing a ludicrous 14 games and failing to find the net on 8 occasions in their first 23 fixtures. For every seemingly impressive win, 5-0 at home to Leicester, 3-0 at home to Middlesbrough and 4-1 away at Brighton, there were the endless stream of goalless draws against Birmingham, Spurs, Leeds, Arsenal, Coventry and Wolves as they failed to find the net in both legs of a miserable League Cup attempt against Coventry and also lost away at Molineux and Highfield Road. Also, they went out of the UEFA Cup at the first hurdle to Polish outfit Vujvuj, typically on away goals after being profligate in front of goal away from home. After Christmas, it hardly got better. Another goalless draw was achieved against Liverpool on Boxing Day before their bogey team, Ron Atkinson's West Brom, put them to the sword a day later. In all competitions going into 1981, Lou Macari and Steve Coppell's 6 goals apiece were United's top scorers, while Sammy McIlroy had added 5. All this within 29 matches. There wasn't an FA Cup run to hang your hat on as Nottingham Forest dumped United out of the competition at the 4th round stage on January 24th. It was going to get worse before it got better, as February 1981 attested to in somewhat of a binary month for the club. United went to Filbert Street and lost 1-0. No goals were ever going to be scored when Spurs pitched up at Old Trafford, and it turned out to be that goalless draw that was utter solace when compared to 2 more 1-0 defeats to their nearest and dearest rivals, Man City and Leeds, before March appeared and Southampton heaped more misery onto the club. Of course, with another 1-0 defeat. After a goal of the month competition was reduced to just static on an old television, United were staring at harsh mediocrity before their trip to Villa Park on March the 14th. Although United found the net in their next 2 fixtures, they were typically drawn, although this time in creditable returns against the eventual league champions Aston Villa and recent 2-time European Cup winners in Nottingham Forest. But United were officially in crisis, and you only knew this because crisis talks were being held by the directors and manager Dave Sexton. He knew his time at the club was coming to an end, but he implored United to just hold off until Ray Wilkins returned from injury. Then he suggested the club's form would improve. Regardless, United were left strewn in 9th after 35 matches with 34 points. The club now probably the cause for the Football League to call an emergency meeting to discuss the 3 points for a win rule. Only Crystal Palace had lost fewer games than United, and they sat rock bottom as the Red Devils were severely profiting off the back of the archaic 2 points for a win system. Had this run of form been brought forward a campaign, United would have been in serious trouble. They would have been sat with every single team beneath them profiting from a game in hand, but United plummeting from 9th to 14th. Thankfully, this rule was reserved for the summer, and thankfully United just won their final 7 matches of the season anyway, beginning at home to Ipswich Town in a run that encapsulated Manchester United of its day. First off, these weren't rampaging wins in mammoth goal fests. 10 goals were scored and only 2 conceded in these 7 matches. Secondly, United's inconsistencies of failing to win the prior 7 was simply transformed into winning the next 7. Nonetheless, the fair-weather United were able to beat the UEFA Cup winners, Ipswich Town, at home. They were able to go to Anfield, home to the incumbent European Cup winners, Liverpool, and beat them too. In a bizarre season, United ultimately finished in 8th place, only 3 points behind Liverpool as the history books note that United lost only 9 matches during the league season, the same amount as the brilliant title contenders Ipswich Town. In fact, of United's 15 victories in the First Division that season, 7 of them came, of course, in the last 7 matches. But it wasn't enough to save Dave Sexton. The decision had long been taken, and come May 1981, Sexton and Manchester United were no more. Boring Manchester United. Dave Sexton optimistically could be called the right man at the wrong club, almost definitely at the wrong time. The biggest and perhaps only positive is that in this period of time, Manchester United was stable. No, they didn't win a thing, but they did go as close as they had ever done in mounting a serious title push since Sir Matt Busby's retirement when they went up against Liverpool in 1980. In this respect, Sexton was walking into this job with one hand tied behind his back if he thought he could stop the boot room juggernaut that had been taken on and evolved by Bob Paisley. Another positive was the phasing out of Busby from the biggest decisions at the club. It is already notoriously hard to succeed a legendary manager, especially apparently so it seems at Old Trafford. Frank O'Farrell and Wilf McGuinness can attest to that. By the summer of 1981, however, Busby's voice had lowered and he was the only director to vote against the sacking of Dave Sexton, proving he had less and less clout as the chairman, and hierarchical shake-up had changed the club somewhat since Sexton was hired 4 years prior. Ultimately, he was the palate cleanser that Manchester United needed between two high-personality managers on the road to recovery. Crucially, Manchester United were in the hands of the same family as Martin Edwards took over from his father in 1980. Whilst that family could provide solidity, there was more than an eye on the commercial revenue and milking the club for what they believed it was worth, as opposed to prioritising on-field success. More money for them would ultimately mean more money to be spent on the club too, and high money, high profile signings probably was the beginning and the end of the excitement at Old Trafford in the years between 78 and 81. To sum things up, I'll go against my better judgment and quote the Daily Express when they had a line in an article that read, "Dave Sexton's idea of excitement is eating an after 8 mint at 7:45. Stability sure, but for United they needed a bit more of that excitement. Crucially, they needed to actually win some silverware, even if it was the second division, as we detailed in yesterday's video.